Hey, where are you guys? What's up? I'm here with my good buddy Charles Fields. Charles?
I'm excited to be here in Waikiki, Hawaii, on the island of Oahu.
So,
Here we are with my good friend Bill Hale, great photographer, podcast man.
Finally, after all these years, you guys yelling at me. First off, I met this man in 2014. He was doing research on a book he was going to do about Hawaii. And he shows up at Duke's and points a camera in my face most of the day. And it was kind of fun. But as I did research on this man, well-traveled, a lot of books. You did books on Cuba, on
Provincetown, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and what else? I worked on a few others, but they're not all finished yet.
Yeah, and then he used to have until what happened in 2018 that changed everything? Because everything goes all of a sudden.
Well, Gail was a designer. Gail and I were working together. My wife, Gail Fields, and she passed in 2016, and so that was a traumatic moment. And then I figured I was getting older myself, and maybe I should retire a little bit. However, I still have a lot of good stories. If you ever want to ask me anything, we could talk. And I want to thank all my friends out there on Facebook that are tuning into this. I know it's late at night, and I'm still getting over the tiredness of late night. So it's, what is it, 1 a.m, I think, in East Coast time.
Probably.
It's probably 6 o'clock here, 6:30, 7 o'clock going on here.
Yeah.
6 hour difference. Okay, Bill.
So a couple things. What got you into being a travel photographer?
Well, good question. I was already a photographer, and I photographed and just, I knew f-stops and how to develop film and all that stuff, and photographed everything I could photograph. And I traveled. So it's interesting because in 1980, I had a Nikon F camera without the light meter and a couple of lenses to go with that. And I traded that all in. I put everything in, just got a ticket on Pan Am, round the world ticket. And that ticket was $1,199, and you could go around the world one direction, and you couldn't go backwards. So I packed up my Nikon stuff. By the time I got to Hawaii, I bought an Olympus OM2 at a camera store in Maui, a couple of the lenses, and that camera was remarkable because I was shooting color at the time. Had a light meter built in, whereas my Nikon F was a black and white. I could shoot, I had the guess on this exposure, so it was F8 and B there type thing.
Yeah.
And so having a nice Olympus camera, which was smaller, and I bought some nice lenses. It turned out to be one of my favorite cameras for many, many years. Been around the world many times, and that's what got me into that. So I photograph wherever I go anyway, and I was young, 1980. How many years ago was that, 45, 42?
Unfortunately, yeah.
So that was a few years ago, and I was younger, a real go-getter then. So I'd be photographing anything I could, anytime I could. So that was what I did, traveled. So my first trip was going around the globe in one direction. I went to New Haven, Connecticut, to New York City. New York City to San Francisco. I stayed in San Francisco with a friend. My friend's brother was there, who I never met before. And I just knocked on door, stayed out there. And from there, I planned on going in the same direction to Honolulu. So I landed in Honolulu and saw my good friend Jack Sheehy and stayed with him for a few days, or quite a few days, or whatever it was. And he had just joined the Navy. We were partying it up big time before that. So we picked up where we left off. But what I really liked about Hawaii was getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning watching the Giants play in the morning, instead of waiting until noon or one in the afternoon to see the Giants play. So, and it turned me on to this sashimi. We'd eat the raw tuna, slice it up nice, eat that, and drink beer and have a great time. So of course I fell in love with Hawaii, and then I had to. Once I'm in Honolulu, I traveled over to Maui. I got to Maui, and I actually bought a couple other lenses there. I think in Maui, maybe a wide angle or 135 telephoto.
Yeah.
And Olympus was a great camera. It was smaller. Everything was smaller.
Yeah.
So I go to Maui, and I had a friend. So here I am. I'm just a kid. So I'm couch surfing, basically. And my aunt and uncle, Jack Neal, from Pembroke Point, Maine, had a neighbor called W. Storrs Lee, who was an English professor at the famous university in Vermont, and which escapes my name right now. But so I went to see him, stayed with him, and he was a great guy with that, and more than happy to put me up, and everybody was just wonderful. So I stayed in Maui. Then from Maui, I went to the Big Island of Hawaii, traveled around that. Back then you could get a car for $18-20 a day.
Yeah.
And drive around. It was really nice. So I loved Hawaii. I loved the culture. Everything about Hawaii was wonderful. And here I am, been coming back since, meeting my friend Bill Hale. And so we swapped stories when we first met. You know how photographers get together and we start swapping f-stop stories and all different things, and who was here and there, and all these different events that we photographed, and bragging rights about. The cool thing about being a photographer is you get to be there when things are happening, and that's a really cool thing. You're there, and you're taking photographs or you're doing something. So after Maui, I flew to Tokyo. It was the first time ever in Asia, and which I loved. And so I traveled all through Japan, and then I had Japan Rail Pass, which means I could go up and down the coast of up and down Japan on the rails and just travel. So Tokyo was an amazing place. I remember the first time I was at a youth hostel that I stayed in, and they had these big rice cookers. I never saw anything like that before. And I never even liked rice before that. But it was the only thing available to eat. You get up in the morning, and there's like all this white rice that, you could eat. And I didn't really like white rice, which is my favorite at this point right now. So I ate so much of it, it's just a favorite. So from Tokyo, after traveling up and down in Japan, to make the story short, my first time traveling, I went Tokyo to Hong Kong. And when I was on the plane in Hong Kong, I met somebody on the plane, or Chungking Mansions where I was staying, and they said, hey, you can get a visa to get into China, which was like closed off city at the time, country at the time. So I went to a certain room, knocked on the door, the guy answers, and I give him my passport and $25. And I couldn't even sleep that night. He said, come back at 2 tomorrow afternoon. And I couldn't even sleep that night because I kept thinking, what a fool. You just turned over you lost your $25 and you lost your passport. And but I came back at 2 o'clock the next day, and people are lined up in the hallway, and 2 o'clock the door opens and he starts calling out names and passing out the passports with the visas in them. So that was the visa to mainland China, 1980, and I walked across the border from Hong Kong to China, and which was 2 separate countries at that time, and they couldn't believe it at the border. I just pointed, and I just said, see, I got they couldn't speak English, I couldn't speak Chinese. I just said, see, and they had to let me through. And I got into China and traveled through China. For 3 months, I think I stayed in China at that point. Such a big country. Yeah. I met my friend Chow, who I changed money with. He had some restaurants. I like to eat and go to restaurants. He was a great cook. And his father was a great cook because his father fought with Mao next to Mao Zedong. And his father was the chauffeur to the governor of the Kwansi province, which is a huge, like half the United States or something province. And his father would stay home since they didn't go anywhere or do anything. His father got gourmet food, got to cook, and so that was great. His father was cool, and but Chow was really cool cat, and traveled through China. Then a year later, I just repeated the same, basically trip again. Hawaii again, Tokyo, Japan, and China. And I saw Chow again. Chow says, "Wow, I see so many people coming and going through China here now, but nobody's ever come back twice." So he fixed up a trip for me to go with his fiancée, and her little brother was our chaperone, maybe 8-year-old kid. We traveled on river boats up and through China. She was just a wonderful little girl. Nice, well, she's a woman. Anyway, it was nice. So I had a nice time with her and Chow, and it was just really nice. So from China, after being in China, which was, I was so skinny, I lost so much weight, and I'm thin to begin with anyway. I go to Thailand. Get to Thailand, and they're making French toast. And I'm just ordering that at these little guest houses, and just having a wonderful time traveling. And at this point, I'm starting to become a seasoned traveler. At least I thought so. And so I'm in Thailand, and then the second time I went to India, and they had a India Pass Airlines. So they had it with Pan Am for $11.99 around the world trip. And then you could, for an extra $400 or $500, you could tack on India Airlines and travel throughout India, which was great. So I really got to know India, got into the culture there, stayed out in the Thar Desert and Bikaner and camel safaris, and it was just nice. Photographing the whole thing all the time.
So how much film did you consume, and how did you transport it? It's being the photo bug of me.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I'd like to say 100 rolls of color film.
Yeah.
That I got. Probably wasn't even that much, but I like to say that or think that. It was a lot of film.
Yeah.
I carried it in my backpack, so I was a backpacker. Carried the film, disposable roll. Back then it's film, so you have to squeeze every roll, every frame you squeezed off. You really made it count.
Yeah.
And so then I got back, and it was all E6 processing. So it was mostly Fujichrome is what my film was.
Mm-hmm.
I got a good deal on Fujichrome. It had just nice saturation. I like that OMS camera because I could set the color for -1/3 stop, which gave it a little bit more saturation in the colors.
Yeah. Fujichrome has that thing about it.
It was a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So
So
that's what we like talking photography.
Yeah.
Fujichrome, little tendencies of this and that and the other thing. But the thing I really liked the most was I was there photographing and pointing my camera at the right place at the right time. So.
Okay. So rewind a little bit. So you have stories about some of the bands you photographed in the beginning.
The bands. Oh, I love bands. So yes. So there was still a lot of black and white days.
Let's do that. Let's do your first 408. You told me a story twice now about your first album cover.
Okay, so I was a dishwasher at the Oakdale Tavern in Wallingford, Connecticut, and they had said, "Wow, we got the Ink Spots coming in to do 2 shows and a live album." So I just said, "Hey, I have to photograph them. I have to do and I'll do this and that and the other thing." So I just stepped up and said, "Hey, I got to do it. You have to hire me for that." And of course, there was no money involved. Photographers don't really get paid very well. And so I got to photograph the Ink Spots, take it home, developed it up in my darkroom. Fortunately, I was really, my father built part of my garage, and so I had a very large darkroom. And we went to the junkyard, got a sink, hooked up the plumbing, we did this, we did that, and it's just a nice darkroom. All you need for a darkroom is safe light, a couple of bulbs, and dark room, door that shuts, doesn't let light in. So I developed the photographs, and then, so I always worked when I was a kid, either paper routes. I used to sell school supplies to, when I went to school, erasers and pencils and different things like that, just to do things. So I had money, and my father knew a guy whose son was retiring from the photography business. He had done all the sports teams, and he had a lot of different photography business going on. So he had the Omega D3 enlarger, which is a 4x5 enlarger, which I still have. Cherish that thing. That's a classic. And, you know, the easel and just different things. All this expired paper and everything. It was great. And then the chemicals. And so I had a darkroom. Could do that. So the Ink Spots was my first band that I photographed. I love music, and I love just the being around that and photographing. I remember Bill from the Ink Spots would have he was the baritone, had the deep voice, and they'd play this thing da 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 da. And then he'd go, "You have one, and I'll have two, and I'll be back before you're through." And they'd play the thing, you know, and they'd all take a break and get everybody to drink. Anyway, that was fun. So I photographed the 2 shows, the Ink Spots, saw how they change the suits and how they do the scenes and how they do the music, and got to hear them rehearse a couple times. So that's all exciting. So I grew up next to a theater in the Round, and every summer Tony Bennett would come in. And back in those days, they'd come in for a week. They'd play for a whole week. And I'd watch Tony Bennett rehearse, and it was so exciting. You know, I'd be a little kid riding my bicycle around the theater in the Round, and but I was polite enough so when the managers or the electrician guys or some of the adults there that worked at the theater would come in, I'd hide behind the seats, or I'd just kind of be good about everything. But what impressed me the most was Tony Bennett would come in, he'd do the song, and he'd stop, and the band, he'd be rehearsing with the local musicians coming in for the band. And that was interesting, too. And then he'd pick up and do it again. So I saw him play for a whole week, rehearsing every day. That was kind of nice. But I photographed bands, rock and roll. Then I get turned on to rock and roll bands. And, of course, I'm trying to do newspaper photography. So when Muddy Waters came to town, I was right in there. Boom, Muddy. Hey, I'm photographing for the local paper, New Haven Advocate. Got to meet Muddy. We drank 6 bottles of champagne together, and Piper's was his brand of, anyway, legendary stuff. Got some nice portraits. So I was consider myself to be a good photographer, so I got good photos of people. I was a people photographer.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then whatever I wanted to do. Point my camera and make sure the exposure was good, you had good composition. So I have natural sense of composition. And so from Thailand, I traveled to India, and then India to, which was interesting because I was then I'm in India.
Yeah.
And I'm hanging out in Delhi, down by the embassies or something, and I'm just trying to, you know, just do anything with a backpack on. And I heard again through the grapevine, you could knock on this door, and there would be a guy who'd give you a visa to get into the Soviet Union, which is pretty much forbidden at the time. So I knock on the door, this old KGB, actually wasn't even that old, but he was older than me, obviously. I was a kid, and I gave him money, and he closed the door, stamped up a visa, got me into Soviet Union. So I took the plane. Pan Am plane was stopping in Moscow. And so I got off in Moscow, and this is an interesting story. I was supposed to be picked up at the airport. Somebody was going to meet me there. In the Soviet Union, people meet you and take you everywhere.
Yeah.
So I get there. Next thing I know, I'm walking around the airport like, here I am. Nobody's there. And then they start turning off the lights. It's really cold. I'm starting to shiver and everything. Finally, I walked up to somebody. I said, hey, you know, what's going on here? So they had it in my file that I was Indian person from India. And they had a picture of me, I guess, because I had these Indian clothes made up.
Yeah.
So they thought I was Indian, not American person. And so that followed me everywhere. No matter how many times I tried to correct it, it followed me everywhere in the Soviet Union, wherever I went. And I remember going into the Ukraine, which is a really great place to go to, Kiev.
Yeah.
And I had an in-tourist guide. And she was just really nice and beautiful and wonderful. And so she was nice. Took me around. But I remember everywhere you went in the Soviet Union, they take you to the Olympic place, former Olympics. We're the biggest in the world. We have the most airplanes in the world. We have the biggest airports. They were the best of everything in the world. And, you know, I'm an American, and that would say, well, that doesn't make sense. But I remember going up to the top of the ski areas where they do the ski jumps and looking down and photographing that and photographing this. And then from Moscow, one year I went to Paris, and here I am in France. And the kid I was hanging out with in Thailand, we did the hike in the Golden Triangle, up where they grow the opium and stuff. And I remember he was saying, he was carving out the sandals and putting these hashish in there. So he ended up taking that back, getting that back into Paris, just like he suspected he would. So we went to his place. He had a job in Paris working at the post office, which was interesting. And like one of these no-show jobs, he'd get up in the morning, go into work, he'd be back 5 minutes later. And we'd smoke the hash and do whatever we wanted to do. It was really, really cool. So these are people I would really like to see now in my old age. You just kind of lose track of them, I guess, or different things like that. But anyway, so it was fun. So I got to photograph. Some of the biggest things I ever photographed was the championship NBA game, Boston Celtics and the Phoenix Suns. Went 3 overtimes, and that was Dave Cowens, Havlicek, and JoJo White, and Don Nelson, and they anyway, I got to shoot that under the basket. So that was cool.
That's crazy.
And, Watkins Glen, photographed that for the newspaper, a few things. Just stuff like that.
Yeah. And talk about recently you recorded did a video for one of your friends.
Yes. My good friend Chandler Travis invited me to come and photograph some songs he was doing, and I thought that they were all going to piece all this footage together, and we got him outside, and it turns out he ended up using a piece that I shot nonstop, right with an iPhone camera, and I shot the whole thing without cutting or editing, because at the time, I still don't even know that well how to edit video and iPhone stuff, but it was great. Just all one take, shot it all. So Chandler taught me the sound. If I'm 3 to 4 feet away, for example, 3 to 4 feet away from somebody singing, and I point, he likes it that I can do that because the sound is really good off the camera.
Yeah.
And so I did that. It's on there. It's called Alphabetize the Wilderness. That's on YouTube. And the thing I like about it, it says shot by Charles Fields, posted by Chris Blood.
Yeah.
And
well, let's because 2 years ago, last time I saw you, you actually had ditched film and just went with your iPhone for a couple of years. What was the big difference of that? I mean, how did you feel about that?
Well, I was trying to do that. I'm trying to stay on top of things.
Yeah.
So technically, the iPhone is pretty good for things. However, doesn't have all the capabilities and bells and whistles of exposure and different things. But people are using it, and you can do it. So I spent a year. I figured, well, if I just spend a year only doing iPhone, I'll be a master at it. At the end of the year, I said, wow, I really don't know that much. So I spent another year, and I didn't think it was that good. Now I'm back to my old 35 again. Well, I call it the 35, but it's a digital.
Yeah.
Just like you're using these days.
Yeah.
Everybody is, I guess.
Yeah. I went digital in '99. I had one of the first Kodak digitals, which was crazy because you had the SCSI cables and it connected to your computer, and you actually at that time it's so advanced you can manipulate or command from your computer the camera. But
those cameras are $25,000 back then.
well, not the one I got. It was the first similar level one. But the thing was, each image was like half a meg. And now each image I shoot now when I process it's like 25 to 50 megs. And so but I shot Henry Campono's HNC's last Alive Together concert. I got that cover without that one. So it was without.
By the way, that was a great concert.
Yeah.
Sunday night at Duke's. I guess he plays every Sunday at Duke's.
When he's in town,
when he's in town.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
So I go to Hawaii. I also look up my friend Bill Comerford, who was a Little League friend, and he was a bartender here in town.
Yeah.
He ended up owning a few Irish bars in town here.
All four of them before the pandemic. Yeah.
4 of them. Yeah. So he's quite the legend here. Every time I walk into a bar, I drop his name and people. Oh yeah, I used to work for him, or people know him.
Yeah.
And
I last month I photographed him and John Hart. You're next. Together, John goes. We're at Anna's. He goes, take a picture of Bill and I took one exposure and it wasn't doing so. They had the overhead lights. I just grabbed the light, put it in their face. It's a classic photograph. Typical what you have to work with at the time. You know me now. It's like I don't put tons of stuff up.
Well,
if I have, I'll
what we do is I remember taking John Lee Hooker down in the basement of Toad's in New Haven. He played a great concert. There was a bare light bulb there. So I got the bare light bulb, John Lee Hooker, and just a classic shot. That's the only light we had. Yeah. And it's kind of cool. That's what the best things are. I watch photographers all the time. I go through people. I find new photographers, all photographers. I'm always a student of all time. And my favorites still are the ones that don't have to do studio lighting. They're just right there in your face. They work with you, have together. So. Well, there we are on the camera, the monitor. I'm looking into the monitor. Amazing technology, this digital world we live in. Yeah, and it makes everything easier because it would take, because you know the gig, you buy the film, you expose the film, you develop the film, you print the film, and then you send it off to whatever news organization. And you got to wonder, well, you shoot film, you don't even know if you got the right exposure, how it's going to come out. Yeah. Then I used to screw up the development every now and then, not very often, but it happens. Yeah, just once. It was once. Just once. Because I told Charles a story a couple years ago. I can say it now. Because we used Tri-X, which is a monster film. And I actually froze my developer, D76, and 1:1. I froze it to 32 degrees. And instead of Kodak recommending 65 degrees or 6 minutes developing, mine was 30 minutes at 32 degrees. And it eliminated the grain because it slowly came up, and you added, as Ansel Adams would say, sodium sulfate. Yeah, but you added, you actually got a zone out of it instead of 3 or 4 zones from concert. You got an extra zone out of the. Well, I got to meet Ansel Adams one time, and he wrote. I saw the paper in his handwriting. He wrote down a formula for Rodinol. Yeah. Which was concentrated. It came in a little bottle about this big. And you put a couple of drops in, you mix it with distilled water at the time. Yeah. This is by distilled water because we couldn't trust water from the tap. Yeah. You couldn't have any minerals or anything in it. Yeah. And but that's how I learned how to clean wetting agents. You put wetting, it's just basically a little soap. Yeah. But it's wetting agents. It was called PhotoFlow at the time. Mm-hmm. It was the cheapest thing you could buy. Yeah. PhotoFlow. You mixed a couple of capfuls in a tiny little bottle to gallons of water, and just you have your chamois to get rid of all the No, you just hang it up and just let it all drain down. Because my community college in Monterey in the peninsula, Ansel would come in that's where he'd get his people work his darkroom from that gene pool. And I forgot. Yeah, because you're a California boy. Monterey kind of boy. Yeah. And that's where John Sexton comes from. His last photo tech came from MPC. But he would always show up. Edward Weston's sons, Brett and Cole, would show up. Oliver Gagalani. I actually took 2 courses from Henry Gilpin. So it's classic. You train stuff.
But my first portfolio, instead of flowers and trees and surf, it was like AC/DC, Ted Nugent, and Pat Benatar. You know, so it was already
Photographing the rock bands.
yeah. Everybody else was doing these pretty flowers, and I got like rock stars. Yeah, so that was
Plus, you grew up next to Dave Mustang from
yeah. The whole
Metallica.
The Metallica thing was somehow we got involved with Metallica very early on. You know, in the career, so we would hear them. Lars would call up when the magazine, Office Hours, he'd call up, listen to this, and we'd hear like Hit the Lights and all this first songs coming up. And so, you know, my first book's on Metallica, my second one's on Megadeth. But yeah. So how many books do you think you published? Because I think you probably lost count by now.
Yeah, probably lost count. I get asked that a lot, but let's see.
Yeah.
There's a few. Not all of my work either. So I photographed some great artwork.
Yeah.
And then Charles Neuenhaus came to me one time.
Yeah. Charles.
And so he came into after we had published a book, and I think one of my books, but he said, "Wow, I want you to do my book." So I looked at his stuff, and I said, "Well, give me everything you have."
Yeah.
So he brought all these boxes and negatives he had from basements and everything else, and I sorted through everything and digitized or scanned it, and we came up with a great book, picking all these pictures. So he carried his camera around the world during Merchant Marine during World War II, and photographed, and so he was just like me, just wanted to photograph everything that he could fit. And then after that came out, Don McLaughlin, who had incredible darkroom work, camera, subject matter. So he went to he was trained in Stanford University to be a geologist, and they sent him over to run the whole operation in Bolivia. But he said he was more interested in photographing than finding oil. They never did find oil or anything for anything in Bolivia. I don't think they even found it to this day.
Yeah.
But they had he photographed great photographs and technical. He developed everything himself. So it's really nice work he did.
Yeah. And who was the guy that photographed? You put his Himalaya book out.
Ken Hansen.
Yeah.
Ken Hansen is a photographer I knew from New Haven, Connecticut, from the Photo Arts Collective. I remember going to one of his shows, one of the openings of his shows. I was just blown away. He had these some of the largest photographs I had seen in any show anywhere. And I'm like a 35 millimeter guy, so I would only make photographs maybe 5x7, 8x10, 11x14 was way too big.
Yeah.
And I like to keep everything tight and small. He was a 4x5 guy, and photographed and made beautiful prints and everything you could possibly imagine technically.
Yeah.
So I remember going to the show, getting there, and I just said, "Wow, I'd like to meet this guy." And somebody says, "Well, there he is over there, loading up the prints." So I rushed over and helped. I says, "Can I help you?" You know, I helped him load up his car and carry the glass framed prints and everything. And we've been friends since then. And I just wanted to. So once I got into publishing, I wanted to do his book, and that's what I did. So I said, "Ken, come on, Ken, we're going to do your book." And Ken taught me so much about printing. And we would scan it, and then we'd sit down at the computer and go through and this, that, and the other thing. So he was convinced that only darkroom work counted. And then I was a digital guy from scanning and how we could go in and pick out little pieces of a photograph. Yeah. So we did a beautiful book for Ken Hansen. And we did duotone, which was nice printing. Yeah. So how I got into photography, publishing originally was, I had a studio at my house in Wallingford, Connecticut, which was a house that I built. I had a 5-acre pond. I did this and that. And I had Deborah Benito was doing a book on linen and lace. And I would photograph. Every Monday was reserved for photographing linen and lace. And she wanted to do a book. And she had her own shop and everything. She was a collector. And so that was good. So the book came out, published by Schiffer Publishing, and I thought when the book came out, it's actually a nice book. Now that I like it, but at the time I was a little disappointed. I could have been, if I had done it, I would have done this, I would have done that, and it could have been more grandiose if I had done it. So that's, I said, geez, the next book. And then, so after that book came out, I basically said, wow, this is a great book. It was fun to do. I got paid to do it. And what am I going to do next? Where's my next book?
Yeah.
So I had to do it myself, basically.
You probably had enough material too.
Well, I picked a new subject. So I moved to Provincetown, Massachusetts, and to do a book on Provincetown, which was needed. They hadn't had a book done in years. I think John Gregory was a famous painter, a photographer, who had done a book years. I never got to meet him. He was before my time. And so there was a niche. There was an opening for a book on Provincetown.
Yeah.
And I did that, and then I said, well, if I'm here doing a book on Provincetown, I got to do a book on Cape Cod.
Yes.
Then I got to do Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and then Ann Packard, incredible artist who became a good friend. So I photographed Ann Packard. I got to meet people when I photographed my Provincetown book. I got to, since I'm a people photographer, I wanted to photograph some influential people. And I got to meet Ann Packard, Jackson Lambert, and we became good friends. I became good friends with Jackson Lambert and Ann Packard, who's still alive today. Ann Packard's amazing because we had the same sense of composition. And now I'm a painter. She's been great. Good friend. Very good friend.
And how did the painting come involved? All of a sudden one day you're like, hey, I'm painting now.
Well, painting. I guess I was always painting because
yeah.
As a photographer, I was in the art department at high school, different things. So I did a painting one time. I used to go behind the stage. I used to get out of classes. I go behind the stage. I just paint. There was canvas there. The school had all the materials to paint and the canvas and everything. I painted it up, and my art teacher looked at it and said, wow, this is incredible, and entered it into the state competition or something. And it won the best of the state, and I got a lot of recognition out of it, headlines, and it was a 5 foot by 5 foot painting.
Yeah.
We stretched it out, and it was just a big abstract. But it got a lot of recognition, and so that got me into painting. But the photography was my real thing. I did that. And then when photography kind of ran its course, I just did photography for so long.
Yeah.
Painting, and actually getting to know Ann Packard. She kept saying, paint, paint, paint.
Yeah.
And she showed me how simple it was and how you can be simple, which I'm all about.
Yeah.
And she is also. How you can keep it simple and make a nice painting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And so that's really nice.
It's kind of obvious for me. I started out as a painter, but I can't. My motor skills are crap, and so I paint with a putty knife or something. I just didn't have.
Well, I do that now.
Yeah, and so what happened? I just went to photography. It was just easier. I don't.
Well, painting isn't about you don't have to like draw the goat or the flower.
Yeah.
Detail for detail.
Yeah.
You just put color. It has to have a view, or you have to have something. You have to leave something for the viewer to imagine.
Yes.
In the painting.
Yes.
And photography was almost too literal for me. But I do like photographing people and getting to meet people.
Yeah.
Jackson Lambert was an incredible artist. I got to know him. And he died in his... So the other thing I like to do is photograph or meet people and get to know people that are elderly. Like Jackson Lambert was elderly. He was in his 80s and 90s. And just to see how they operate and how... he was a classic, famous guy. And yet we're good friends, and it was kind of neat going there. He always had Jim Beam for me to drink some bourbon American whiskey, and so then I got to meet John Grillo. So Leanne from his gallery calls me one day and says, you really got to do a book on John Grillo. Go talk to John Grillo. So she recommended me to go to John Grillo because we did an Ann Packard book that won best book in the USA. So that put us on the map for art books. And that's a classic book. That's sometimes people are telling me they're buying it on eBay for $2,700 now, used.
Wow.
So that's nice. So we put it out at $150 retail originally, but it was limited to 2,000 signed and numbered. And those are all gone right away. So that was a big money maker. So people come to us and want me to do books for them, publish books, and I said, well, we're not going to make money on this. And
Yeah.
I remember Ann said, well, you watch. She said, we're going to make money. So she paid me $90,000, and then she said, watch, we're going to make money on this. So the whole thing was she gets paid half the money coming in. We split after that.
Yeah.
So she got her $90,000 back. I got the $90,000. We all made money on it. And the book sold out so fast.
Wow.
So she's the type of person, I kind of say this, she gets up in the morning before breakfast, does a painting, and has it sold for $20,000 to $50,000 or something every day of the week, whatever she does.
Wow.
And so she's in galleries all over the world. So when I travel, I walk into a gallery, I say, you know, you got Ann's work in here. She's my friend. And every gallery, and Ann said, this is what they'll say to you. Sure enough, they did. Every time I go in there, they say, can you get Ann to sell us more paintings? Everybody says that. It's constant. So she's a woman of her word. She does this and that and the other thing. She's a great woman. She started out painting in Provincetown to feed her family, putting paintings on a fence. And she would sell them, get enough money, and then go out and buy food that day, cook, feed the kids, and go on and on. And her son, Michael, turns out, before we moved to Provincetown, I was going to move to Costa Rica. And I was subscribed to the newspaper called the Tico Times for a year. I had a year subscription. And I remember reading about an American that got into a plane crash, and they were in the jungle, and they were left for dead. Nobody could find them.
Yeah.
They were gone. And turned out to be, I mean, some people died from the crash, some people lived, but it turned out the guy that was in the crash, airplane crash, was all broken up and hospitalized. And it was Ann Packer's son, Michael, who I know today. He's a great. So I remember Ann saying the first time, she said, yeah, my son Michael's his highliner, which means he's the fisherman, commercial fisherman that catches the most fish.
Yeah.
So he just got swallowed by a whale recently. And he was on Jimmy Fallon, National News, and stuff like that. It's pretty interesting. So he got bruised up his leg or a bit, but he came out of it fine. Talked to him after that. But people almost said, wow, it's almost impossible. But whales, you know, you don't go into the inside a whale. The whale has baleen. They can only eat small fishes, filter through there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway, being a photographer is fun.
It is.
It's fun. That's all. I like to have a good time.
So what's next for you, Mr. Charles?
Well, that's a good question. At this point, I'm trying to take care of my health and just to be. There's a lot of, you know, people talk about bucket lists and stuff.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't really have a bucket list because I try to do everything I can, and I try not to be bored with anything in the future. But what's next? What's next? So I don't really set these main goals that I used to set, or just grandiose ideas, but only because I'm aging, I think. So I think I'm in my twilight years, but I'd like to just keep hustling. So a few years back, or no, just a year ago, after Gail passed away, that set me back, I thought, because I just said, well, I'm going to get back into being a real hustler again. So I built a few houses, I did different things, and I said, wow. Then I'm coming out of my house, in my driveway, my road that leads to my house, and onto Route 6, I got T-boned. So I got hit in an automobile accident, and I was concussion, I was unconscious. I was pushed over to the side into a small park area in North Truro, and when I came to, there were two EMTs in the back seat and EMT in the passenger seat, and they said, don't move. I said, fine, I'll do whatever you want. And then I said, you know, I just recently had spinal surgery at Mass General. And they said, boom, airlifted me right there in a helicopter to Mass General. And being over 65, it's all covered, Medicare, good insurance.
Wow.
So it's good. there's advantages to being over 65. Plus, if somebody was to punch me out and I'm over 65, they could go to jail. So I remind people that like that. Anyway. Any more questions?
I think we had it. So, to find Charles's work, you probably have to eBay or something. He's you kind of discontinued it. You're not doing anything off the website. It's a good place to start to look for things, and I've tried a couple times, and they are out there. It's really worth looking for because this photography is amazing. The books are great.
Yeah, and I'd be happy if anybody found anything too, because it is out there.
Yeah,
and
there's a lot. So
I'm proud of my work. I'd like to keep hustling. It's just I just haven't been able to keep up with shipping and just demand for things. And I get phone calls and orders. Sometimes people say they want this, they want that, and other things, and I just can't really deliver like I would like to. So I probably spend 4 hours a day taking care of my health at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing this and doing that. And
well, if you lived closer, I would work with you, but you live on the other side of the world.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it because it'd be a great guy to work with too.
Yeah, it would be a lot
Same
of fun.
thing, vice versa.
Yeah.
If I was here, I'd be working for you, doing anything. So I don't mind working. Work is one of the things I've done all my life, and it's one of my favorite things to do. Because that's how you learn. How hard is it to get up in the morning and put effort into something?
Exactly.
Not hard at all.
Nope.
And being a photographer, that was the best part about anything because you got to be there. You got to do all these great things. And
just not being there, but knowing your equipment, knowing your exposures, knowing how to have a vision what you want out of the subject or out of out of that situation. Because I would go to a gig and we'd have pre-production meetings, John and I, and then it's going to be a cover shot, maybe centerfold, it just could be a contrast shot. So I had that in mind already.
Well, you had your own publishing magazine.
Yeah, we had my buddy John Smith, we had our own magazine. So we would get together and we would, he was coming to town or I had to fly someplace and this is what we needed to do, laid it out. So it was...
What was the name of your magazine again?
Called Metal Rendezvous.
Metal Rendezvous.
Yeah.
And
it was like from 1981 to 1989.
Well, that's exciting. Photographing bands is exciting, especially when you have an accessor in, you know people in the band, just anything you do.
Yeah, and then we grew up with something, we came up together with some of the big bands, or the huge bands now, but we were all at one time. But it was like, the combination of having a band you're working with for 5-6 years and then meeting your heroes. Like all of a sudden there's Alice Cooper hanging out talking to you, or you're backstage with Black Sabbath or whatever.
And I got to photograph Alice Cooper from the front, from just when he's on stage.
Yeah.
I got this incredible photograph, him holding up this giant toothbrush.
Yeah.
And doing the act like that. And then Grateful Dead. I mean, I used to be a Deadhead and go to all the concerts. But going to Watkins Glen, bright sunny day, tri-X-pan film. So I get to shoot at a high exposure, say 2/50th of a second, which was high then.
Yeah.
And the thing about photographing bands is you get the speakers, everything's vibrating all the time. So if you shoot a low shutter speed, which usually the lighting's low or something like that, and you get to, any camera shake. So what we learned as photographers, one of the first things we learned is how to squeeze it down carefully, not just jerk it like that.
Yeah.
Same as you were firing a gun, so to speak. Just squeeze it carefully.
And as I photograph with Nikons, and Nikons are heavy, it actually fits into the realm of things. Anything lighter kind of wobbles for me. And so,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, everybody has their own technique and their own way of doing things. Like Frozen Developer, I never heard of that before.
Yeah, that was I didn't tell anybody until like last 10 years ago.
Well, it's your trade secret.
Yeah.
And
because that's something
never heard of that before.
Something I developed in college, because college is good for experimenting, and then I'm going, how do you apply this calculus formula to something? And it was like, okay, Kodak can give you a little cheat sheet in the box or suggestions, and then you expounded it to the nth degree, because you couldn't get any colder than 32 degrees. That was the actual colder because it would freeze. It was that, and then you just calculate to the developing time. Yeah, and I'd come home after concerts, 2 o'clock in the morning, develop film, and then string it up, and then next morning contact sheets and take it off to the office.
You did contact sheets.
Yeah, just for reference.
I always had a hard time with contact sheets just because I like looking at the negatives and then putting them, running through the larger, making my prints right away.
Yeah.
Because you start to know which negatives are really nice.
Just for reference later on in life, because you'd have that go back to.
Oh yeah, contact sheets are great.
Because
I went back later in life and contacted a lot of my stuff, but I didn't
every
do
time
the
you pull
original.
out your negative, no matter where it's gonna scratch it. And so,
Oh yeah. Well, I was careful.
Yeah.
I used that Patterson system, which is like this glassine, waxy type thing, so you could put it through. It didn't scratch it.
Yeah,
and I was always a little leery of this print view file because it was plastic.
Yeah.
But yet they were fine too.
They were fine. But usually everything in one envelope and write on it and seal it off for years later.
Yeah, so that's what we talk about as photographers, all those things, and Kodak and Fuji. And so towards the end, when I was getting into digital, Kodak, and I was a professional, so Kodak and Fuji were making these breakthroughs in film. They come out with an 800 color film, negative film, and it was just fine grain. It was just easy to use. It was great, nice tones. Before that, you had to have like this portrait color, different tones, and skin tones was a big deal to get when you photograph people. Now the color film that they came out with simultaneously with digital was just superior stuff. And I just found I have a tub of film that they give you these blocks of film, 20 rolls at a time, blocks of film, and it's filled with that stuff. And it's outdated. At first I had a freezer, then I disconnected the freezer. I said, why am I wasting all this electricity for film? So now I just have it in a box in the basement. It's cool. So film is cool. Digital's cool. Photography's cool.
You're cool.
It's cool. Thanks, Bill.
Okay.
Thanks, sis. And thank you for everybody for saying hi to me and comments or whatever you want to say. But it's fun.
And just to be Facebook side, I'll put a link, but it's at Charles Fields. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, man.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's have a beer.
Yes. Okay. Aloha.
Aloha. Mahalo.